Hello, everyone. As you are starting to filter in, we're going to give it just a couple minutes. We've got a lot more people continuing to join us. We've got a rather large group today, which we're really excited to see you all. So just about 2 minutes and we will get everyone set and ready to go. But as we kind of kick off to kind of learn a little bit more about who's all with us, if you want to go ahead and use that chat feature. So if you happen to scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll see the chat feature. Go ahead and chat and say where you're from. We can get a chance to learn a little bit more about where everyone is joining us. I see we've got some Connecticut, we've got Massachusetts, Tennessee, excellent, Colorado, love it, all coming through. Great, Minnesota, San Diego, Los Angeles, more Colorado, everyone from all over. It sounds great. Southern California. We've got some Texas, Oklahoma. Great. We've got quite a few from San Francisco. All right, excellent. Well, great. So also joining me today is my colleague, CJ. You'll notice that in the chat feature, she is CJ, ask me anything. She's gonna go ahead, she's gonna be our great chat monitor as we get towards the end of this. As there are questions, you can feel free to send those along, but go ahead and you can wait for those questions until the end. And some of those questions might get answered during the presentation, but then we'll try to get those as answered as quickly as possible. My presentation portion hopefully will be around about 30 minutes, giving us at least 15 minutes to answer some questions. But if we don't get to all those questions, because we do have quite a few people with us, you'll have some contact information at the end that you can reach out to us, and we can certainly get you any of those answers that you have. But I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start sharing my screen so that we can get this party started. Hopefully you can all see my screen there. Let me just introduce myself really quick. My name is Brad Kloa. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Admissions at CU Boulder. I primarily work with first-year students. My territories I'm the admission counselor for include the Denver private schools in Colorado, and then students who are from the South, so that'd be Tennessee, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and also the DMV area we call it, so Washington, D.C., Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. So I'm that admissions counselor that works with all the students as they navigate the process with CU Boulder. And you'll hear me reference admissions counselors quite a bit throughout this presentation because we are a great resource, not only at CU Boulder, but really institutions all around the country to really help you understand what this process is like. So when I formulated this presentation, I really wanted to take it from the ground up, looking back on the experience that I had when I first looked at going to college many years ago. I was a first generation student. For those of you that don't know what a first generation student is, typically that means that neither of your parents or grandparents have gone to college and earned that college degree. And so I didn't really have a frame of reference of what that college search process was. And so a lot of the terms that were being used as I went through the application process that different universities were throwing around were pretty confusing. And so what I wanted to really do was start at some of the basic terminology for folks. And some of these things might be a little familiar at the outset, but then really get into some granular things. I'll certainly be using CU Boulder as a strong example of where you might see these terms used, but really helping you understand what might be used across different institutions. So you start to see some familiarity as you go through these processes. And throughout this process, also helping you think about some questions that you could ask those admissions counselors at those schools to help you navigate that process. So really the objectives that we have here for today, let me get this going to that next slide. Sorry, just pause a little bit, but really it's to explain those common terms, some of the things that you're gonna see quite readily in this process of applying to different institutions and what those differences are. Really helping you prepare for what's to come so you don't feel quite as lost. I know I felt pretty lost when I started that process. Beginning to think about those questions that you want to ask, things that you need clarified, and also understanding that's totally fine to ask for help. and ultimately really trying to help reduce some of the stress that can come with applying to college. We want this to be an enjoyable experience. This is an exciting time in your life as you're thinking about what that next step might be, trying to figure out where you'll spend potentially the next 4 years of your life. We want it to be exciting and not so stressful. And then also to help you understand that you are not in it alone. Many people have similar questions like this. It's okay to ask those questions. Everyone's going through it. As admissions counselors at these different institutions, we don't expect you to have all the answers. We spend a lot of time learning our own independent institutions, and that's why we're here to help you figure it out as we go along. So like I said, I really want to start with some of the basics. Now, some of these things that we're going to talk about at the outset might be pretty clear to you, but for some of you, it might be some things that you're thinking about. These are sometimes confusing if you haven't seen them before, or if you're not quite sure how they apply to you as you're looking at that college search level. So from the outset, starting with this student type. As you're doing different college searches, you might see different things like undergraduate, graduate, and professional. And you might not know where you fall into. I work with a lot of students who, when they're indicating if they're either undergraduate or graduate student, they often believe that because you're graduating from high school, you might be a graduate student. That's not the case, but it's definitely an understandable mistake because, again, that familiarity with these terms. But as you're looking at undergraduate students, these are typically going to be your associate's degrees, often earned at community colleges or junior colleges, and your bachelor's degrees, typically earned at those 4-year institutions. After you graduate, typically with that bachelor's degree, you have that opportunity to move on to graduate school. So you might have heard about an MBA or that Master's of Business Administration, or individuals going for their PhD or their EDD, those doctoral degrees. And then you have professional schools. These are going to be schools where, think about your doctor, your dentist, a lawyer, an optometrist. They've all gone through a professional school to earn those degrees after initial education, at least at the undergraduate level. Today, we're really going to focus on undergraduate students because most of you hopefully are looking at us for that undergraduate institution. There's really a couple different primary types of undergraduate students, focusing on how you may join us between first year and transfer. So first year or freshman, it might be called at some institutions, those students are going to be entering college for the first time. You've taken no college courses after high school. Now, some of you might be sitting there and you've actually taken some college level courses, but you've taken them while in high school. By definition, with CU Boulder at least, and many other schools across the country, because you're still in high school and you haven't graduated from high school, even though you've taken college level courses, you're still considered a first year applicant or a freshman applicant. Transfer students on the other side, they have started at another college after graduating high school or even earning their GED. So they've earned college credits. Sometimes it's at a community college, maybe it's another 4-year institution, but now they're making that choice to transfer to another institution to maybe complete their degree or to continue their degree. So those are typically the undergraduate student types that you might apply to us. The next thing to understand is really what you may be classified as, a domestic student or an international student. So domestic students, by most definitions at most institutions, are going to be US citizens or permanent residents. So you hold that permanent residency card. International students, pretty standard across all universities across the US. An international student would be defined as a student who requires a visa to study in the US. Again, if you're not quite sure which one of those you might fall under, great question to ask your admissions counselor just to be certain. There is a pocket of students there that might wonder where they fall into, thinking about like DACA students. They might not qualify as US citizens, but they might not hold that visa. There are definitely institutions like CU Boulder around the country who want to help those students still attain those college degrees. And so we're going to work through that process. For example, at CU Boulder, we actually have a DACA liaison in our office to help students navigate that process. Continuing on to that, through that application phase, we talked about how your student type, that first year or transfer. Now, how you might apply, the different applications that you might see. There's really 3 primary, and you see them there on the screen. You might be familiar if you've seen them before, or if you've been going through high school in a few different sessions, you might have heard some of these. There's Common App, there's an institutional application, and then there's the coalition application. The Common App, if might be most readily on your mind. The Common App is an application where there are over 900 different colleges and universities that are part of the Common App. So you can actually utilize one application through the Common App and apply to any of those 900 schools. You can actually apply to multiple schools through one application. CU Boulder, for example, we are called called Common App exclusive, which means the only way to apply to CU Boulder is through the Common App. Now, some schools might also have their own institutional application. So if you're applying to that institution and it's the only institution you're applying for, you might just fill out their institutional application that's often online. Now, some schools might be a combination where you can actually choose which of these applications you'll complete, but you might do something that's going to be your best strategy. So maybe it's a school that offers both the Common App and institutional application, but then you're applying to another school that's only the Common App. It's probably in your best interest and saves you a little more time and a little bit more efficiency to just complete that Common App, because you can send that to multiple institutions. The Coalition app that's listed there is very similar to the Common App. There's about 150 colleges and universities across the country that are part of the Coalition app. Again, the ability to apply to multiple institutions that are a part of that coalition with one application. Now, if you're applying as a transfer student, you might see that you're probably going to be using that institutional application. As we're talking about those applications, I want to talk about application fee waivers, and you'll see the application fees a little bit later as we talk about some of the different elements of the application, but I really want to put this at the forefront. There are a lot of opportunities for application fee waivers because there's many institutions across the country, CU Boulder included, where we do charge an application fee, which goes towards the actual processing, paying the salaries of individuals that are processing those applications. However, we don't want an application fee to be a hindrance for students to apply if that application fee is going to be a financial burden. So there are quite a few ways to qualify for application fee waivers. This by no means is an exhaustive list, so you can kind of see based on the institutions you're applying to what you might actually be eligible for. The Common App itself, when you complete that Common App and you're applying, you'll see a long list, typically of federally supported programs that students might be a part of. Maybe you've heard of TRIO, or maybe you're on free and reduced lunch. You can see that those will actually qualify students for fee waivers, and you'll be able to do that. And then each of those schools that you're utilizing for the Common App would actually waive that application fee. In Colorado, for our Colorado residents, we have something called Colorado Free App Day, which all of the public institutions within the state of Colorado got together and they said, okay, on this one day in October, all of our Colorado residents can apply to any public institution in the state for free. They don't need to worry about a fee waiver, they get to apply for free. You might see this if you're applying to other states and maybe you reside in other states, but another great way to have those fees waived. And there are also schools across the country who do their own free app days or free months. Actually, the school that I graduated from, they actually do a full month where every student who wants to apply can apply for free during that month. And there's a few other special programs that you might attend that they offer fee waivers, for example, an application workshop. There's also alumni legacy waivers sometimes. CU Boulder is one institution where we offer fee waivers to our students who are legacy, or that means children or grandchildren of individuals who have graduated from CU Boulder. So a lot of different ways there. The big thing in that sense is if you feel like that application fee is going to hinder you from being able to apply because it is a strain financially for you and your family, certainly reach out to your admission counselor and to those institutions to find out if there's a way for you to qualify. Oftentimes, guidance counselors, post-grad offices at high schools know that information as well. Now, how you might also apply through those applications. There's often a couple different schools, different options at different schools. That's direct admission and standard admission. I'll start with direct admission. CU Boulder would actually be a direct admission school. That means that you actually apply to the specific major, the college, the program in which you hope to study. So if you want to be an engineer, you would apply directly to our College of Engineering. For some schools, you'll be applying standard admission, and that can mean a couple different things. For some standard admission schools, that means that you're simply applying to that university or college and being admitted to that university, and then as a student is when you actually decide what major, you sign a major and what program you're a part of. For other institutions like CU Boulder, while you are applying for direct admission to a specific program, they are competitive. And so there aren't always enough spaces in those programs for students to be admitted directly. So engineering would be a great example. So if we can't offer direct admission to engineering, we can still go then the standard admission route, where we can offer you that admission to the university, and you'll work through a process while a student to enter that major or program that you wanted to be a part of when you initially applied. So a great thing to ask those colleges that you're working with is, should I be applying directly to my program, or is there a different way to go about that? Talking about deadlines then is, when do I apply? This is another big one that can be confusing. You see 4 different terms there. You'll see early decision, early action, regular decision, and rolling. Many institutions will utilize these deadlines differently, or they might utilize many. I'll start with early decision there. If you're applying to an early decision school, really that means that that's the school that you plan to attend no matter what. So if you're admitted early decision, it's typically a binding contract. That means that if I'm admitted early decision, I'm attending that school. You have to withdraw your applications at all other institutions. You're really committed. And you can typically only apply to one early decision school because, again, it's a binding sort of contract where if you're admitted early decision, you are going there. The next one that sounds similar, but it is a little bit different, is called early action. Early action is non-binding. CU Boulder, we are actually an early action school. So when students apply early action, and if they're admitted early action, they're not committed to join us until you actually confirm your attendance and decide to enroll. The big benefit for early action is that you hear back in a much more timely manner. And you'll see that plug there, November 15th is our early action deadline. Regular decision then, some schools will have, often in combination with either early decision or early action or both. Regular decision is often the final deadline to apply to those institutions. So you can see January 15th there is our regular decision deadline. So for students who don't meet that early action deadline, they still have until January 15th to apply regular decision. Regular decision is also non-binding. So if you're admitted or regular decision, you're not committed until you actually decide to confirm. Rolling admission schools, they don't really typically have deadlines. So you can actually apply at any point during the year. They typically evaluate applications as they come in and release those decisions, but there's not a specific deadline typically to apply to those institutions. So now talking about some of the things that you might want to ask an admissions counselor, and this is going to be a theme throughout the rest of this presentation, giving you some ideas of questions that you might ask an admissions counselor just to get clarity on what their process is. Obviously, I'm explaining to you many of the things we do at CU Boulder, but we know that many of you might be applying to other institutions, and we want to equip you with how to ask those questions. So in the slide before, we talked about those different deadlines that you might apply for. So a great question for an admissions counselor is if there's any benefit to applying by a certain deadline. Does it increase your chances of being admitted to a specific program if you apply early versus regular decision? Or does it reduce your chances if you applied later? Great questions there. We talked about that direct and standard admission. So this is going to be a question that I often get. Sometimes students might be concerned about applying to a competitive program, and they feel they might increase their chances of being admitted to the university by applying to an undecided major rather than the major that they'd like to join. But in our sense, we want you to apply directly, because even if you're not admitted directly to that program, we can still admit you to the university through another process. So we don't want you to self-select out. However, that advice from other institutions may be a little bit different. And the final question there is, what must be submitted to meet a deadline? Every school might be a little bit different. For example, at CU Boulder, to meet, I'll use early action as an example, to meet that early action deadline of November 15th, we have to have a complete application. So it's not just the Common App, it's all of the other required materials like your essays, letter of recommendation, and transcripts that have to be on file with our office by that date to qualify. So that can be a really good question for you to ask as well, especially as if you get close to deadlines, if you have a completed application or not. So we talked about some of those, how to complete that application. That really leads into our next segment about what may be required with your application and why schools might actually ask for those things. And we're going to break those down. I'm going to show you here, though, what the application checklist looks like at CU Boulder. So these are all components that go into the actual review of our application. So some of those are going to be required. Obviously, the application, essays, application fee, high school transcripts, academic letter of recommendation. Those are all required. And you see different things like college transcript, SAT or ACT scores being optional, resumes being optional. It's those required elements that have to be in to meet those deadlines. But all these things that we're asking you for comes into creating an admission decision. This may look very similar at several institutions that you're applying to, that they're asking for similar things. For some, they might ask for less. Some might ask for more. So again, really important that you're checking with each of those institutions you're applying to what is all required. So let's, like I said, the things that are going into your decision, those elements that I just showed you on the checklist, they inform what's called this holistic review. And you'll probably hear this term quite a bit, is that the school employs a holistic review process. That means that we're not just looking at grades or test scores. We're looking at all the things that are part of that application, the essays, your leadership positions, work experience, volunteer experience, basically everything that you're presenting to us in that application and those supplemental materials helps in the review of deciding what that admission decisions are. Some schools may not utilize this holistic review. So if some schools are only asking you for transcript and test score, they might have minimum cutoffs there and they might not be looking at other things, but many schools like CU Boulder employ this holistic review process. So starting off with one of those first things that was on that list is essays and writing supplements. And we could probably talk for a few hours about essays and writing supplements, but they are really an important component of the application process, because this is really the opportunity for admissions offices to get to know you outside of those transcripts, especially when we probably don't have the opportunity to meet you in person. Now, you'll see a couple different things used for essays and writing supplements. You'll see there first that the Common App and the Coalition App, they have an essay that you have to write as a part of their application. When you write that essay and you submit the Common App to multiple schools, that essay goes to all of those schools. There'll be a few instances where if a school doesn't require an essay, you can opt out of sending that to them, but for the most part, that essay will go to each of those schools. So an important thing to remember when you're writing that essay as a part of Common App or Coalition and sending it to multiple schools, you probably want to be careful about what you're stating in those essays. For example, if you're applying to the University of Southern California, but you write about, you're also applying to CU Boulder. And in that essay, you write about how much you love CU Boulder. It's your dream school. You can't wait to go there. Just remember that a USC admissions committee is also going to read that. So really important that you consider that. Other schools might also have an institution-specific essay. So even though you might write the Common App or Coalition App essay, they may have an additional question that is specific to their institution that you're writing for, and it will only go to that institution. CU Boulder is a great example of that. You'll write an essay for us through the Common App, but then you'll also have an additional writing supplement about a question that really is important to our community, and you'll be sending that only to us. Sometimes on those institutional application onlys, you might see an institution-specific essay as well. And then for some schools, you might not have to write an essay at all. They might not even provide a prompt, or they may make it optional if you wanted to submit that of your own fruition. So some questions that you're talking about essays with different schools, especially if you're seeing that an essay is optional. Asking them, should you submit it? How does that enhance your application? Does it hurt you not to actually submit that essay? Is there anything in particular that you're looking for in an essay for your for the school? That's the question we probably get the most, is what are we specifically looking for? I promise you there's not one thing that we're looking for. We're really looking to hear from you. If you want more tips on how to write essays for colleges and through the application process, we actually have another session like the one that I'm giving today, specifically centered about writing for those essays. And CJ is actually going to share with you a link of how to register for that essay session. So if you want to get more tips on how to write essays for your college applications. But we're going to continue to keep moving right along here. High school transcripts. So high school transcripts are probably going to be a pretty standard requirement regardless of where you're applying. And so the question becomes, what are we actually looking for? So many times in those high school transcripts, we're not just looking at each grade. We're not just looking at the overall GPA. We're going to look at something called the trend in grades. So how have you done from the time that you started high school to the time that you've applied? We're looking for a positive trend, even if you didn't start out so well that you've been improving your grades. Or maybe you started out really well and you've maintained that. So we're looking for that positive trend. We're also looking at course selection and rigor. So have you had the opportunity to challenge yourself with advanced placement courses, international baccalaureate, honors, dual enrollment? Those are great things that we like to see on an application. However, also know that we're looking at the opportunities that you have in relation to your school. So if you happen to attend a school that doesn't offer AP or IB classes or honors classes, you're not going to be looked at negatively for not taking those courses if you didn't have those opportunities. Also, we want you to select those courses if you're prepared to take those. We don't just need to see them on the transcript. We want to make sure that they're actually adding value to your education as you're preparing to do so. We're also going to look at individual course performance. For example, because at CU Boulder, you apply to a specific program. I'll use, again, engineering as a great example. We're probably going to look pretty heavily at your science and math courses because that is going to be a prevalent part of your curriculum once you're at CU. So we want to see what your performance has been like. Another question that we often get is, what if I didn't do so well? Maybe my grades dropped a semester, or I didn't start out so well my freshman year. One thing that's important to know is we know things in life happen. Every student has different experiences. Illnesses happen, life issues happen with families, that we want you to tell us about those so we can look at those maybe negative performances that might have occurred during your high school career, and we have an explanation. Again, we know that those things happened, and as long as we know about those, we can make sure that we're reviewing your application in a little bit different way. Now, that next thing I have there are required courses for admission. So I'm going to use CU Boulder as an example. These are what are called minimum academic preparation standards. Now, if you were to go to our website and you look at some of the selection process for CU Boulder, you'll see 4 English, 4 math, 3 natural science, 3 social science, 3 foreign language as requirements for admission to the university. It can be a little misleading because what that means actually is that these must be completed at least by the time you graduate from CU Boulder. However, most students that are entering and applying have completed these simply by nature of completing their requirements for high school graduation. So we get calls from many students who maybe don't have 3 years of foreign language and they're concerned that they won't be admitted because of that. That's not the case. We can certainly still admit students who don't meet all of these different years in these certain subject content areas. So you can certainly still apply. You're just completing those later. So if you're seeing similar things on other college websites about required coursework and you're worried that you don't have those met, certainly reach out to that admission counselor to find out if it really would exclude you from admission or what that looks like for their institution. So that's that first question to ask of that admission counselor is, what are those required courses and what if I don't have them? Another great question that we are often answering is, what if I decide to change courses during my senior year? Maybe I was in AP Calc, but I dropped that to take a statistics course. Does that impact my admission status? So asking those questions. And then again, we referenced this before, but if something happened during your high school career causing your grades to drop, where should that be reflected? Know that actually even on the Common App, there is an additional information section, which is a great place for you to talk about those anomalies in your transcript. And if anything was actually impacted by COVID-19, Common App is actually adding a new question specific to COVID-19 for students to be able to explain how that might have negatively impacted their academic or life circumstances. One of those other things that was on the list was official college transcripts. Now, obviously, if you happen to be applying as a transfer student, college transcripts are going to be required. But I also mentioned that some of you might be taking college level coursework in high school. So if that's the case, you have dual enrollment credits, Great questions for your admissions counselor is, how might that impact the admission process? I often work with many students who will earn an associate's degree. They'll have 60 credits already earned in college by the time they graduate from high school. So that's when I'm certainly encouraging them to send those transcripts so we can see what that college level performance is. And that can often give us another view of the student. And then when should you actually send in those transcripts is really dependent. For us, you don't have to send those college transcripts if you're applying as a first-year student to be a part of the application process. But again, you certainly may want to strengthen your application, especially if you're particularly proud of the grades that you've earned. Or you might not have to send them until you actually decide to enroll at the institution. Now, the hot button here that we're going to talk about is standardized tests. Now, if we have any rising seniors in the room, most of you have probably been impacted by COVID-19. Many of you probably have not had the opportunity to actually take an ACT or SAT because those have been canceled. And so you're probably seeing news all over, especially if you're looking through these college searches, about changes that many colleges are making, where standardized tests, both the ACT and SAT, used to be required by most of the universities around the country. Many of them have moved to other aspects. You see things like test optional, test flexible, test waived, test blind. I will be honest, I do not envy all of you having to navigate all the different schools and what these different processes are. So this is really important that if you're confused about what the testing policy might be at the institutions that you're applying to, certainly reach out to them. For example, at CU Boulder, we're test optional. So if you have the opportunity to take the test, you certainly can submit it. It can become a factor, often strengthening your application, but certainly not required. Other institutions have different policies with test flexible, test waived, so it's really important for you to understand what that is. Do not hesitate to reach out because, again, this is a big transition also for colleges and universities across the country. So we're working with you as well to figure out how this will work. So the questions you have are probably the same questions we've had. So here's some questions about those standardized tests, especially as we look at some of the different requirements or the different policies. Asking right up front, am I required to submit the ACT or SAT to receive an admission decision? Also, maybe you're applying direct admission to certain programs, and do those specific programs at the school require an ACT or SAT? I was actually just on a webinar with a couple other schools the other day, and a couple of the universities, while they were test optional, some of their programs still required the ACT or SAT. That would be important to know. Also, scholarship consideration. So while admission may be test optional, knowing if the ACT or SAT will be required for scholarship consideration. And then ultimately, if you are applying to an institution where test scores are still required, asking that question about what if I'm not able to test because none of the testing locations are opening because of COVID-19, and what are your options? I would say that probably throughout this upcoming year, those standardized test questions are going to be the biggest ones throughout, so never hesitate to ask those. Letters of recommendation, pretty quickly here, most people are familiar with letters of recommendation. This is asking someone to write a letter on your behalf. Again, giving us another glimpse of you. At CU Boulder, we require one, and that's an academic letter of recommendation. So we're really wanting to hear from a teacher who can speak to your academic history as well as your potential for academic success. But you might also want additional letters from maybe coaches, employers, advisors, giving us another glimpse of you maybe outside of the classroom. So what's your character? What's your work ethic? Who are you as a person? The important thing about this entire application process is you're trying to convey who you are, both academically and personally to a committee of people that won't have the opportunity to meet you. So making sure that you feel confident in those letters of recommendation as well as representing who you are is really important. Again, when it's how many letters should be submitted, pay attention to what those requirements are for schools. I would say on average, we typically see 2 to 3. And then I always just stress quality over quantity. Your letters of recommendation are probably going to say pretty good things about you. And so 5 or 6, when 2 or 3 will do, is probably going to be sufficient. And then there are going to be some other materials in consideration. Some schools will have these as required. Some programs you're applying to may be required, or they may be optional. So for example, resumes, honors, awards, activities, and involvement lists. Many of those things that might be listed on those areas might be a part of the Common App. but maybe you run out of room and you want to provide those, or it's easier for you to provide a resume instead of inputting all that information, you can certainly do so. There's portfolios and recordings and videos there. Maybe you're applying to a fine arts program and they want that as a part of the evaluation process. Important to know that if you're applying to those specific programs. Or what are those schools that don't utilize that? For example, at CU Boulder, we don't utilize portfolios and recordings as the admission process. So even if you send them, they don't really go anywhere at that point. Auditions typically are reserved, again, for some of those fine arts, and you'll see that those often take place after you've applied and you're working with those music departments, theater departments, if those auditions are required. I want to take a little bit of time here to focus just on demonstrated interest and interviews. These are utilized differently among different schools. Demonstrated interest is important to know that there are some schools who actually how often you actually interact with the institution, how many events you attend, how many emails you send, how many phone calls you have with an admission counselor. That's called demonstrated interest, and they actually track that. And so it actually helps students to have demonstrated that they're really committed to that institution as they're being reviewed in the application process. At CU Boulder, we don't utilize demonstrated interest. We're certainly happy to talk to you about any of the questions that you have, but we're not tracking to see how many times you join us to be included in the evaluation process. Some schools also do utilize interviews. So maybe it's an alumni or alumnus, or maybe it's a staff member where they will be conducting interviews with applicants. Typically, you'll see those a little bit smaller, or typically private schools might utilize those interviews. So great questions to ask your admissions counselor is, are there any additional materials or steps that you need to take when applying, especially if it's a specific program? Like I mentioned, fine arts would be pretty typical to need additional information. Asking right at the outset, is demonstrated interest a factor in your admission decisions? If it's not, then you don't have to worry about trying to just have as many interactions. Maybe it's just making those meaningful interactions with those institutions you're interested in. And then do you conduct interviews? And if they do, how you can actually set up an interview. And just a couple final thoughts before we get to some questions here. I want to remind you that you're not in this process alone. Seek out assistance from an admission counselor. I'm actually going to have CJ input our link to our Find My Counselor tool, so you can actually find out who your admission counselor at CU Boulder would be. We break those down typically by state, sometimes the regions. You'll notice how to find that counselor. Reach out to us. That's what we're there for. And again, not only at CU Boulder do we do that, but most universities and colleges across the country have people who are doing the exact same thing. Our entire job is to help you through the process. So never feel like you're burdening us with questions. Always reach out. Remember that application is meant to represent you. Spend some time on it. And no one knows you better than you. So really don't stress too much about those applications, because again, you're really writing about yourself. Tip here, don't wait until the last minute. Common App, Coalition App, essays, that can take some time. And especially if you want to put your best foot forward, take some time to do so. Don't wait until that last minute. And also because things can happen as we get approach deadlines, and you don't want to miss a deadline because your internet goes out or those types of things. If you're not sure, ask. That goes back to that Find My Counselor tool. Also, take ownership of this process. This is an exciting time. And this is also a great preparation for all the things that you'll be doing in college, and really making that choice and having ownership of the process will make it much more valuable to you. You can be proud of what you're doing. And then also finally, remember that everyone's going to have a different journey. Enjoy yours. Don't worry about comparing yourself to others. Don't compare about where others are going compared to yourself. Remember, this is your journey, the opportunity to find the right fit place for you. No path is the exact right path for everyone. So again, everyone's going to have that different journey. Don't worry about comparing to others. Enjoy your process. Finally, there's just my name there, and you see our admissions contact email. So if you have questions, you can certainly email our admissions office. Even if you're trying to track down some additional information, there's that phone number too. Again, always feel free that you can reach out to us and ask for help. I'm going to stop sharing there. And CJ, if you want to start asking those questions, we've got a couple minutes to go through those.
Sounds awesome. Thank you so much, Brad. What a wonderful resource you have provided for the students here. I hope that was helpful for everybody. Hi, my name's CJ. I'm part of our on-campus programs team. For anybody wondering, I am English, so I apologize if anybody does not understand what I am saying. I have some really good questions, but I have been having conversations with people, so let's see if I can pick these out. Brad, can you talk a little bit? I know this isn't 100% relevant. I had some students asking about those students who are undecided and really don't know which college they might want to pick on the application, what options are available for them.
Great question. So I'll speak to CU Boulder specifically here. We actually have a couple different options. So within a couple of our colleges, that would be the College of Arts and Sciences. So think natural sciences, social sciences, liberal arts, fine arts. Within our College of Business, the College of Engineering, we actually offer undecided open option to apply to those programs. So maybe you know that you want to be an engineer, but you're not quite sure what type of engineering. You can apply open option to engineering. So it already gets you the ability to start right there. But if you're a student who is really undecided, you're not quite sure, maybe you have interest in business and in engineering and communication, you're kind of all over the place. That's how I was when I was applying to colleges. We actually have something called the Program in Exploratory Studies, where you can be admitted to the program. You'll never graduate from the program because it's not an actual degree. The sole purpose is to give you intentional advising to find out what the best path for you will be based on your interests, based on your goals, all those different types of things, very intentional advising, then to help you find your path into one of the 7 programs, schools, and colleges at CU to graduate from. Sometimes there is that stigma, and I understand the pressure too when you're interacting with folks like myself at college fairs, at high school visits, sometimes a lot with family members. The question as you're in your senior year is, what are you going to do in college? What's going to be your major? What are you going to graduate with? And you can feel that pressure that you have to have that answer. Know that it's totally okay to be undecided. About 25% of the students who come into CU Boulder every fall are undecided. Many more will even change their mind once they're there. So it's totally okay. There are options there, and you can always explore what those might be at other institutions too.
And Brad, I want to add to that as well. It's okay to change your mind once you're in college. And if you've attended any of our information sessions or our student panels or are going to, our students will speak very openly about how easy that is. And as long as you're doing some of the core classes at the same time, you can still graduate within 4 years, as long as you work with your academic advisor and they can help you on that path. So even going into one and changing your mind at some point really isn't too much of a problem either.
TJ, I actually got sent a great question here. The question was, how do you submit the CU Boulder specific essay? There's a couple different ways. So when you're in the Common App, there is some odd functionality, and I apologize, it's a third party, so we don't control it. But when you're applying through the Common App and you're on your college page for CU Boulder, the first submission is just for the Common App. So that will send your basic application and it will send your Common App essay. Right below that, there will be the CU Boulder questions and statement. You have to fill out that essay in that portion and submit a second time to submit it through the Common App. Now, you don't have to do that. You could also send it to your admission counselor or to our general account, admissions@colorado.edu, and we'll add it to your application. You'll also notice that when you apply to CU Boulder, you're going to get access to your application status page, and you can actually upload your writing supplement to that application status page as well. So there's several different avenues, and we just want to help you make sure that you can submit that.
Perfect. Thanks, Brad. I did have that question a couple of times as well. And just on that theme, do students submit their SAT or ACT and their transcript through the Common App?
So you can self-report test scores through the Common App. This will be different by institution if they will accept self-reported test scores or if they need official. If it's official test scores, those will typically need to be sent by either College Board or ACT, or some of your high schools might actually include it on the transcript, and that can be considered official. Other schools, like I said, CU Boulder, now that we are test optional, will accept those self-reported that you can put in the Common App. Transcripts, they wouldn't be submitted through Common App. And there's a couple different ways that you can submit those. For most of you, your high schools will take care of that. You probably have a guidance counselor or post-grad office where you'll request that your transcripts are sent to certain schools, and they have systems where they will send them to. This year, for us, we're also accepting unofficial transcripts. So if you have a copy of that, or you can also send that as a review process. Again, really important to know based on all the schools you're applying to, do they require official or unofficial? But transcripts are usually one of those that they have to be sent independently because there's not an avenue to do that through Common App.
Thank you. If a student has not taken the SAT or ACT, will it be seen as a disadvantage?
Not at all. That's one of the reasons why we and many other institutions have moved to test optional, is because we know that many students just don't have that opportunity. That is not your fault. COVID-19 has put a wrench in a lot of different things, so it certainly won't hinder that. But if you have had the opportunity to take it, and let's say you are particularly proud of your score, certainly go ahead and send that, and that will be another factor in the evaluation process of your application. But certainly we won't look down on any applicant if they haven't taken that ACT or SAT, or even if they've taken it and they haven't sent it. Just because you take it, because we're test optional, does not mean that you have to send it.
Great, thank you so much. And there are some high schools out there, like the Devlin High School in Colorado, that is known to be very rigorous and kind of have that higher academic rigor. How is that taken into consideration when applications are being reviewed?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple different ways. So in our office, we all have different territories. If you were with us at the beginning, you heard about 13 states that I listed off and parts of Colorado. And what we are known as what are called territory managers. So part of what we are there to add our expertise is knowing the schools in our areas a little bit more so that we can add that value if there are questions from the admissions committee. Also, when you're submitting the Common App, your school will submit something that's called the school report. So the school is actually providing us with typically like a breakdown of the grading scale, how many students are in AP classes, average test scores, average grades for all those classes. So we really start to see that. And so we're able to get a lot of information from that school report as well that informs a lot about that rigor. So that's something, again, that we're reviewing as a part of your application.
Perfect, thank you. If somebody has signed up to take the SAT, let's say at the end of August, can they apply before they get their scores back and then send the scores in after they've got them?
Absolutely. And we would certainly encourage you to do that, especially because now we are test optional, that there's really no deadline to get that test in. In years past where we have been required, you would have had to have at least one test score on file by that deadline to be considered. But because we're test optional, it can come in at any time. Even if you have the opportunity to take it and you want to take it again, certainly apply, and then you can have that additional information sent. To qualify for any of those deadlines, the things this year that you're going to need to have a complete application are a completed and submitted Common App, a paid application fee or waived application fee, transcripts, letter of recommendation, your Common App essay, and your writing supplement. That will qualify you then as a completed application. Whether we have a test score or not will not factor into a completed application.
That makes sense. Thank you, Brad. Test scores obviously historically have impacted scholarships, especially the merit-based scholarships. Do we know yet how that's going to work, or is that something that's still in the pipeline?
Yeah, so at CU Boulder, we are still trying to figure out how that will work for scholarships. Full disclosure, for us at CU, the state of Colorado actually has always required that the public institutions in the state utilize standardized tests as a part of their admission process. Only about 2 weeks ago was a bill passed and signed by the governor that actually allowed us to make the decision to go test optional. So there's been a lot of movement very quickly. So we know it's optional for the admission part. there's still talk between the regents, our financial aid office, and many different parties of how that will impact the scholarship process. So hopefully those answers will be coming very soon. I promise you it's the same questions that we are asking on a daily basis. There is a on our website, that, especially under the COVID-19, it's usually a band right at the top of the page. There's frequently asked questions, and one of the top ones is prospective FAQs for prospective students. And many of the questions at the top right now are those questions about test optional, and you'll see that answer about the scholarships. How does that factor in? And as soon as there's that actual answer, that will be in there as well.
Great, thank you so much, Brad. What would you recommend are good and best subjects to write about on the essays?
Oh, so I would say good and best subjects is something that you're passionate about. Because when you're passionate about a certain topic, it comes across in those essays. So to give you an idea, like I said, there's 2 essays that are required for our application. Last year, we received 44,000 applications. That's 88,000 essays. It's hard to figure out one unique aspect to talk about. You're probably going to see, if let's say you did a search on the web for maybe essay topics to avoid, you'll see a list of some topics that someone came up with that are overdone or that admissions counselors don't want to read. From my standpoint, I think from anyone in my office standpoint, and from many of the other admissions counselors from across the country that I've worked with, don't pay attention to those lists, because really we want to hear about something that's impacted you. So I'll use a common example is we hear a lot of essays about students who scored the winning goal to win their league championship and how great of an experience was for them. Well, there's probably a lot of students who scored the league championship goal across the country. So while that could be a very similar essay, if that's particularly impactful to you, write about it. That's great. The other thing that's really important to remember is don't try to write to one specific person. There are many different people of all different ages that are going to read your essays. So trying to write what you believe they want to hear is going to be tough, because even members of that specific committee will read your essay a little bit different. What I would also suggest is, as you're writing those essays, if it's a particularly abstract topic, maybe you are really interested in astrophysics. If you write about astrophysics in a sense of an astrophysicist, I'm probably not going to understand, because that is not something I'm familiar with. So you really need to make sure that those concepts are understandable to a wide audience. One of the suggestions I often have for students is, if you're writing an essay, having someone who doesn't know you and doesn't know the topic read it, and if it makes sense to them, it will probably make sense to us as well. But I would say no topic is off limit. If you love the topic and you want to talk about it, absolutely go for it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, we've got about 6 minutes left, so we're going to get through as many questions as we can. If we don't quite get to your question, I will share that Find My Counselor link again, and you can ask. All these questions are perfect for any admissions counselors. They are all as great and knowledgeable as Brad is here today. Okay, Brad, if you apply early decision and are deferred, is your application looked at a second time?
Okay, so going to go back into that terminology. So early decision is going to be a little bit different in terms of other institutions, so I can't speak to that. We don't utilize early decision at CU Boulder. So we have early action and regular decision. So if you do apply early action to CU Boulder and you get a postponed decision, is really what it's called. That gives you the opportunity to send additional academic information if you'd like, and then we would review your application again during the regular decision phase. So basically what happens is, when we hit that November 15th early action deadline, we start to review all of the early action applicants. We then release all of the decisions for the early action applicants prior, at least by February 1st. And then we start to review those regular decision applicants. So if you had received that postponed decision, it's just giving you an opportunity, again, to submit any additional academic information, often like first semester grades, and then we review your application again during regular decision.
Thank you. Does the business school require test scores for an application?
So at this point, none of our individual colleges require an SAT or ACT, so everyone is test optional.
Awesome, thank you. Do schools with institutional applications favor that application over the common or coalition application?
So, not working for an institution that does that, I can't say specifically. However, working with several colleagues, typically there isn't a preference. The reason why they offer each of those opportunities is to make it in the easiest for the students. So, for example, typically if they're offering that institutional application, it means that you're probably just applying to them, or you're applying to schools that aren't on the Common App, or you completed that application early before you knew. So typically there's not that preference given one or the other. Many schools like to just offer as many chances as possible for students to actually submit the application. Typically, if you're seeing like a institutional application, you're seeing the exact same types of questions, essays, those types of things that you would see like on a Common App.
Awesome, thank you so much. Does CU Boulder give scholarships to international students?
So there are some opportunities for international applicants. In that Find My Counselor tool, you will see that we also have international counselors. I would certainly encourage you to talk with them. I work primarily with first-year domestic students, so my familiarity with those financing opportunities for international students is limited. Our international team is outstanding, and they can certainly provide you with all of that insight, especially as it relates specifically to the country that you're coming from.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brad. Do all parts of the submission need to be submitted at once, or can you submit one at a time, assuming they are all in by the deadline?
Yeah, you can certainly submit those one at a time or a couple at a time. Just it has to be a completed application, so all of them have to arrive at least by that deadline. A great example here is Colorado Free App Day. I saw a question in there of when is Colorado Free App Day? So for those Colorado residents, this year it will be October 13th. So what we would encourage our students who are in Colorado to do is go ahead, send your transcripts, maybe send your letter of recommendation, have your essays ready to go, have everything here, and then save, even start to work on your Common App, but then on October 13th, hit submit on that Common App. Or you can go ahead and maybe you just complete the Common App and you submit on that date. Then you can still send your transcripts, letter of recommendation, those things after. So to qualify for that free app day, it's just submitting that Common App on that day.
Great. Thanks for that information, Brad. I didn't realize the date had been confirmed to October 13th. So sorry to those people who I told we did not know the date yet. We do know the date. Okay, final question before we wrap everything up here. We have somebody from Florida, and instead of offering AP classes, their school offers AICE classes under the Cambridge program. Mm-hmm. Are those credits also accepted?
I am not as familiar with those. However, I would reach out to DeMonte Madden. Again, in that Find My Counselor tool, he is the admissions counselor for Florida. And so he would probably have a greater familiarity, and you can also look into that a little bit more. That's another great thing about having counselors that have certain geographic regions is we get to know the nuances sometimes of things that are offered in those areas a little bit more than someone else might. For example, in the Northeast, it's quite often that narrative transcripts are used, and those aren't used everywhere else. So certainly, again, utilize your counselor at CU Boulder. We love hearing from you, and we're happy to provide those answers. So for our student from Florida, DeMonte Madden is who you'll be working with.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brad. I just saw a couple of people have just popped into the waiting room. Hopefully you were kicked off and you haven't just come in thinking that the session is about to start, because the session, unfortunately, is just ending. But I'm going to share the summer series link in here again for what we have available for the rest of August. Brad already talked about the college essay session that's going to be next Tuesday. I also would like to highlight a session that we have next Thursday, which is called What Should I Major In? And for that, we have a career advisor and one of our academic advisors from the program in exploratory studies are really going to be doing a session to help students decide what the right path might be for them. which I think could be very helpful to many of you here. So please check out that summer series. There's so many different things going on there. If you did want to ask questions directly to students, that is an option, especially if you click the virtual information session. We have time at the end there as well. But thank you so much to everybody for being here. Brad, I'm going to pass it over to you to wrap everything up.
All right. Well, once again, thank you all for joining me. Hopefully you found some of that information valuable. Again, we know the process of applying to colleges can be challenging. We all utilize terms a little bit different. We don't make it easy on you, but certainly, again, we hope you'll reach out to us to ask any questions, and hopefully we'll see you along the way. Everyone stay healthy and safe, and hopefully we can welcome you back to campus soon. Have a great day.